Hi, welcome to another edition of Profits and Purpose, a production of Colorado Business Roundtable, where we talk about the interconnectivity of Colorado in terms of academia, business, community, and government, and that we know that we're all in this together in terms of Colorado's economy. And especially right now, workforce is a number one issue for all of our partners, and it should come to no surprise. But we're doing a special series related to workforce. And that's why I wanted to invite Brock Herzberg onto the podcast with us today. Welcome, Brock.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Brock has a variety of roles. One of the ways that we've collaborated the last couple of years is through his role managing CBCIS, which I'll have to think very carefully. Colorado Business Coalition for Immigration Solutions. How did I
You
do?
nailed
Hopefully,
it. You nailed it.
good, good. We share common interest with CBCIS in terms of modernizing immigration systems that have been really stuck in the mud for far too long. And how do we think about immigration in terms of, especially our current workforce shortages? So, Brock, I'm really excited to have this conversation with you, and we'll share this
Thank you.
out with our partners on how, on a little bit of context for CBCIS, how we've worked together, and kind of going forward. But before
Absolutely.
I jump in with questions for you, I'd love for you to just share a little bit about your journey. As I said, this is one hat that you wear, but tell us more about your journey and how you ended up here today. And I also see you're, I think, at the state capitol, busy doing some good work today as well.
Yep. Well, first, thank you, Debbie, and thank you to Cobert for inviting me on your podcast to talk. I always enjoy partnering with Cobert, and any chance I get to listen into your podcast, be on one. You guys hold phenomenal webinars as well, so I really do appreciate that. As Debbie said, I do wear a couple different hats. My main hat is I am the principal and co-founding member of my lobbying firm called Capital Focus, based here in Denver. We focus mostly on Colorado issues. We do some national issues, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And my clients range from agriculture to pharmaceuticals, the Gaming Association, kind of everything under the sun. We advocate for here at the state capitol here in Denver. API Colorado, which is a member of yours, Debbie, is also a client of mine. And my story is somewhat kind of boring because you don't often hear that people grew up wanting to be in politics. And that actually is how I got to where I'm at. And Debbie is right. I'm sitting on the third floor of our state capitol. Our General Assembly is currently going for the next 4 weeks. And I've never been so excited to see a clock tick down 4 weeks than I am right now. But I got interested in, I mean, politics, but mostly advocacy as a young kid. I grew up on the eastern plains of Colorado. I'm a native. My family, I was the fifth generation born on a dryland wheat farm out there. And I started at a young age to realize that the more successful my parents became at farming, the more interested and engaged government got into what they were doing, whether that was a local government at the county commissioner level, regional government issues, the state government, and obviously agriculture, much like many industries, is directly tied to the federal government. And what I saw is that I had two parents who loved what they do. They still love agriculture, as do I. What they did not take an interest in is interfacing and interacting with people who made decisions about them, whether that was mill levy increases on their land, things that were going on with their local school board. So I discovered early on that if they weren't engaging, they were most likely, I don't want to say they were taken advantage of, but they were being discussed without having anybody there to tell their story for them. And so I based my all of my internships, even in high school. I worked on county commissioner races out in Washington County, which is my home county, so 100 miles straight east of where I'm sitting right now. In college and in graduate school, I tailored all of my papers, internships around politics, whether it be at a local level or a state level. After I was done with graduate school, I decided that I thought I wanted to live in Washington, D.C. So I went to work for, at the time, Senator Wayne Allard, who was a Senate Republican here out of Loveland, but obviously one of Colorado's 2 U.S. senators. It took me about 3 months to realize, living in Washington, D.C., and we'll allude to this in a little bit, that not a lot gets done there. And I know people are sometimes glad for that, and then sometimes they're frustrated by it. And that's when I finally realized I wanted to come home and advocate for companies and individuals that either didn't feel comfortable doing it for themselves or weren't even really aware of some of the discussions. And that's kind of in a roundabout way how I got here.
Well, and that's so fascinating, Brock. I don't think I knew the story about your parents being that influential on you. They must be really proud of you and want to talk about what's happening and really excited about your work, I would think.
Yep. They don't quite know what I do, because when I tell people I'm a lobbyist, my dad just kind of, so do you just have coffee with people? And I'm like, well, coffee and sometimes something a little bit stronger, depending on the topic that we're talking about. So yeah, but they're great people, and they're very supportive of me.
That's amazing. I had a similar interest in politics, really wanted to have an impact. And it was funny, I started volunteering for campaigns in high school, and it's kind of the opposite. I don't think my parents really understood what that was about. So I would bring them in when they were in Colorado to march in a parade or to do something. And they were always game, but it was an interesting family activity as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's fun.
Yeah.
So our paths cross in a variety of ways, as you said. Really the pro-business side, if there is such a thing, understanding how when business succeeds, communities succeed. And that's part of the reason why I think CBCIS is such an interesting avenue for you to lead. Give some history to that organization, Brock, and why immigration is of interest to you as well, personally and professionally.
Sure. And for CBCIS, I am their program manager. So we are an organization of which Cobert is gratefully and thankfully a partner coalition member of ours. But we are made up of businesses throughout the state, not just the metro area. We are made up of businesses of small, medium, and large sizes. Some of our coalition members are themselves just individual business owners, and they are not a part of a corporation. It may be just them and one other person. I have been working on issues like immigration my entire political career. Growing up in agriculture, you see it almost on a daily basis. And then as I got a little bit more into politics, especially as I had come back from Washington, D.C., and realized that there needs to be voices stateside that advocate to our federal delegation, that they've got the support and backing of the people that are voting for them and that are residing in their state. And that was what was so appealing to me about the Colorado Business Coalition for Immigration Solutions. I had been a part of it with clients that were a part of it. But when I got the opportunity to actually be a leader with them and lead the program, I jumped at it for a couple of reasons. One, I think immigration is an underpinning issue that runs throughout our economy, and it's not segregated into just one industry cluster or two. It is something that runs throughout the economy and helps power our economy. Two, it is vitally important as an issue to the economics of our state and our communities. And three, and this is the one I've really tried to be conscientious of, is helping business talk about a topic that it's probably one of the touchiest political topics there is out there. And we can all think of some of the other ones, whether it's religion or any other hot button issue. Immigration is an issue that we all are impacted by it, whether we see it with the food we eat, the hotels we stay at, some of the goods that we're purchasing and how we're purchasing them. It's something that runs throughout our economy and our systems and our communities. It is one of those things, and we've all heard this, when you sit down to a meal with your family, don't talk about religion, politics, and I think immigration is one of those because it gets such a reaction
right.
out of everybody. And that's what drew me to the topic and to the business community to try and help advocate. And the business community, I think, is one of the best advocates on this issue.
And I was going to harass you a little bit. You said you've been working on it a long time. I was going to say, well, have you fixed it yet? Like, what's,
No.
come on,
Not
Brock.
even close. I can
I
remember
actually
these.
worked on it a long time ago as well. And it's one of
Yep.
those odd issues where both sides of the aisle, dig their trenches, both
Yep.
sides of the aisle sometimes don't seem to want solutions. And so how do we take away some of the emotion and find some lanes that we can work on together, which I think is what we've been able to do.
Yep.
And to some degree, CBCIS has been around, for quite some time, and it started with the Colorado Compact.
Yep.
Which tell us more about that. I'm familiar with it, but I suspect some of my partners who might be viewing this or listening to it on our podcast are not familiar with the Colorado Compact, which sought to actually be that common ground, practical playbook that people could find alignment within.
Yep. And Debbie, you're exactly right. You could, honestly, you could interview yourself and answer, because a lot of your thoughts are the same as mine, and why CBCIS came into an existence. Part of it was we were hearing from our federal delegation out of Colorado, not just one side, but both Republican and Democrat, saying we need feedback. We need feedback from everybody, but the one place we feel that there's not quite silence, but we're being communicated to in vacuums, is the business community. So a group of business leaders got together and said, we need to be able to coalesce as a community. And by coalesce, I do not mean 100% agree. We need to be able to coalesce around the fact that we need to see some sort of immigration reform move forward. Now, what reform looks like for a dairy farmer is not what reform looks like for the owner of Vail Resorts or the owner of a fast food restaurant here in Denver. But what can be agreed upon is there needs to be movement. So the compact sought to not alienate anybody within the business community, but bring us together around some pretty common sense tenets, such as we have to approach this conversation with the federal government in mind. We'd have to impress upon them this is their issue they have to solve. It cannot be up to a state, because then, as you know, Debbie, we get 50 different patchworks of immigration policy that nobody can abide by. So we want the federal government to finally take responsibility of this issue and start to manage it. We want to have a background of a sense of national security, that this is such an important issue to everybody, but we have to keep what's best for the entire country is that safe, legal immigration force. We also wanted to have, and I don't want this to sound callous, but one of our tenets is it has to be good for the economy. And Debbie, you know better, and you've already mentioned what's good for the economy is good for the communities of Colorado, because you uplift that economy and it's the people in the communities that are driving it. So any approach has to have that economic approach. And then also, you can't talk about immigration without talking about enforcement, that there has to be components of this that not only as employers, but the employees feel safe in the environment that they are working in or hiring in. So those are some of the broad tenets that brought the compact together. And when you hear them, it was purposely designed to, when you hear some of those tenets, you say, I agree with that. I think that's a good way to approach, instead of, when people talk about immigration, they automatically go to, well, you've got two options. It's either build something to keep people in or out, or amnesty, which is a word that's a lightning rod of a word. We've wanted to take out the pressure of the rhetoric around immigration and bring people together more on, here are some tenets that we can agree on. And Debbie, you deal with this every day, running a trade association and an organization like you do. Not everybody is going to agree on everything, but if you can have some core guiding principles, and I've seen this, it helps keep the conversation focused, and it helps keep business owners and individuals, instead of when they hear me say, well, we are going to talk about some enforcement issues, instead of them saying, well, I don't agree with any of that, they can look at it and say, as a broader holistic approach, we cannot not talk about that. So it
Right.
brings people in without pinning them down of, you will support 7 of these tenets. It makes the conversation a little bit easier to have.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and that sort of leads me to the next conversation about the toolkit that we partnered on a year or so ago to try to help businesses really understand. We came up with sort of the 5 key issues around immigration reform, and we'll put this out with our broadcast as well, so that people can see that link. And just to kind of remind ourselves of them, transparent, consistent, and predictable administration of laws,
Yep.
Attracting and retaining foreign-born students at Colorado universities, access to temporary high school workers to fill jobs,
Yep.
very, very practical solutions without getting into the hot button issues that really divide. And there's a time and a place and people who want to come together on that. But how do we come up with the broad-based ones that really work for the employer community
Yep.
is a different set of
Yep.
priorities and principles that we can align within.
Absolutely. And Debbie, I think that partnership with us, with CBCIS and Cobert, creating that toolkit, and I don't know the feedback that you've received, but I've received positive feedback on just what you were talking about. Thank you for showing us, giving us kind of a roadmap of how to talk about this issue in a way that not only brings down their blood pressure about talking about a touchy subject, but when you're talking to your community members, to your employees, you're not starting out from a situation of, it's a hard issue, we're never going to figure it out, and there's just so much touchy things, or sensitive topics. It's a way to help us as a business community lean in on the issue and help our employees also engage in the conversation.
sure.
And I think that toolkit you guys were the genesis of trying to get that put together, and just happy to have the collaboration with you guys on that. I've had a lot of positive feedback on it.
Yeah, same for sure, Brock. It's been really important for our thought leadership together. But I'm going to press us on something, because I think what I'm hearing more and more now, I think the toolkit has value. We probably need to update it at some point
Yep.
here. But what's been really pressing us with our partners at the roundtable is workforce was a big issue 2 years ago. It was a big issue a year ago. Now it's a crisis in terms of finding
Yep.
talent, where some of my private sector folks would not have wanted to talk about immigration issues a year ago, 2 years ago. Now I think we're at this really critical, interesting time where, frankly, we've got to figure out workforce solutions and making sure our employers have the talent they need to continue to grow and thrive. And it's a whole new world. And I'm curious if you're seeing the same thing. And if you are, what's in store for 2022 and beyond?
Yep.
Are you seeing that same level of urgency in terms of modernizing immigration strategies?
Debbie, I 100% agree that has ratcheted up because of COVID, but I think we needed to have the conversation. It just got slammed into us in a 2-year time frame, but it exposed us not having this conversation. So I think it's been so extraordinarily helpful that this conversation has started. And what you've seen, and I think this is where, and I know as business members and as a business community, a lot of times our mantra to government is stay out, let us do what we do, and let us create the markets and dictate how all of that works. We've gotten into a stance now where we can't do that without a reliable workforce. And I think you're starting to see the business community lean in on some things happening here at the state capitol. There's been some bills around, Debbie, you know some of these, around workforce development and partnering. Instead of us saying one thing and bureaucracy and government saying another, how do we come together? Because I think for the first time, not the first time, but in a heated political environment like this, you're finding business leaders and political leaders come together and say, we have to do something on workforce development, or we will continue to be in this fog of a pandemic. Even when we're coming out of a pandemic, what you're seeing is great collaboration in the very building I'm sitting in between Democrats, Republicans, business organizations, and the advocacy organizations saying we've got to work together. There's been a couple bills passed around healthcare licensing, and not that we're asking take away all of the regulation around it, but have government speed up how they're doing some of these regulations, maybe drop some of the more archaic ones. There's a number of different bills that the education, especially the higher education community, is supporting here that deal with how do we get a workforce trained and where they need to be to thrive in an economy like Colorado. So I think there's a couple things going there.
Yeah, I was actually on the task force for, and again, the name is so long, I don't know what it is. It's the 1330.
That's all I remember.
I know, for 5 months. And now we're seeing the fruits of that, which I think is to your point. Colorado doesn't have the time or the patience to not lean in and have more urgency and more collaboration. And I'm really excited, since you're at the Capitol every day, that you're seeing that is very inspiring to know. I've been involved more on the periphery, but it's great news for workforce. And that same energy with collaboration and speed and agility, could potentially remove some barriers at the federal level, perhaps on the subject of immigration. Are you seeing anything kind of on the federal level with any movement at this point?
So, and that's a great point. I think a lot of what we do at the state level, as long as it percolates up, I think that's a great thing, and it shows. We're obviously, as everybody knows, in the midst of probably one of the most contentious midterms that we're approaching in November. However, what I'm hearing, and when I talk to my counterparts in other states, all of them are saying, we're talking to Democrats and Republicans, that now is the time. I know every year is going to be a mid-year or some big election. We need to act on immigration. And I think the workforce development issue being the tip of the spear is causing our federal delegation again to try and go back to this. I've heard that there may be an effort before we get into November to revamp, especially in the Senate, some of those workforce modernization bills that they had been debating. So I think, and Colorado and the Business Roundtable, you guys being a part of those conversations, that's not without notice from our federal delegation. And while I'm trying to remain optimistic that they can get something done by November, I don't know if that will happen, but I think they've heard loud and clear. Not having the conversation just because we're approaching November is a non-starter for us. And it's organizations like yours and many others that tell them it's uncomfortable, but the conversation has to be had. I think we'll see at least some movement before November coming out of the Senate.
And it's sort of like Groundhog Day again, right? There's always an election. There's always an election. They were saying that 20 years ago. So I think you're right. And for people listening in, Brock, I'm so honored that you're going to be a part of a bigger webinar conversation with the Consul General of Mexico, with the immigration senior VP at the Business Roundtable in Washington, D.C. That'll be a really robust time to check in on those levers of kind of state, federal, and global perspective on immigration.
Absolutely.
So I think we've got really good opportunities to sort of bring more people together and see how we can move the needle together.
Absolutely. And Debbie, the Business Roundtable encompasses so much, and you guys do so much for the business community. I really do think some of these conversations, and not just because I'm a part of it, and as I said, I've listened to multiple other ones, it's these conversations that I think we don't realize because we don't travel back to DC. They do have a lingering impact, and I cannot stress the importance enough of conversations like that with the people who can highlight the issue and then the people who can help us deliver on those issues. It's critical to, especially on this issue, but all business issues, we need to be advocating for those types of issues and positions.
Yeah, perfect. And well said, Brock. And I appreciate you joining us today from the Colorado State Capitol. That's such a great background. I keep expecting something, really interesting to happen behind you, but you picked a really secure spot.
Yep.
But
Yep.
thanks for that. We're gonna, I don't know if you've got a website that's easy to say, or we'll put it in our little plug for our conversation today. Or how can people know more? Where do they go?
Yep, it's www.cocompact.org. So cocompact.org, that you can see all of the people who've signed on. We are a free organization. You can just sign up and start getting maybe too many emails from me, but staying updated and plugged in, not just here in the state, but with our federal delegation as well. And I appreciate the opportunity, Debbie, and the partnership that CBCIS and COBRT enjoy with each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Brock, for the time. Appreciate your thought leadership on this issue and many others that are important to the business community. And especially joining us today, this has been a production of Colorado Business Roundtable, talking about workforce issues and what they mean to Colorado's economic vitality, especially coming out of the global pandemic and the economic disruption. So tune back in for more information about workforce issues that are important to you. And we appreciate you joining us today.
All right. Thanks, Debbie. Thanks, everyone.